talking about the life and career of Killer Khan, who passed away just a couple of days ago at age 76. And unfortunately, one of the things that I noticed throughout everyone, there were a bunch of posts about him, a bunch of things all over the place. Every single one of them said WWE superstar Killer Khan. And that, I don't know about you, but that just annoyed the hell out of me. I know why people do it. I get it, but it speaks to your point that if you lead an audience in a certain way, if you let them kind of dictate all of wrestling, and all of wrestling is seen through the WWE lens, that's just the way people are going to see it. And I don't know if it bothered you as much as it bothered me. I just didn't like seeing WWE superstar Killer Khan, or former WWE superstar Killer Khan, passes away. I mean, this is a dude who had, quadruple the amount of matches in New Japan that he had in WWE. The guy who started wrestling in 1971, retired in 1987, was all over the territories, All Japan, New Japan, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, he had a run in WWF, no doubt about it. He had a very significant run in WWF, but I don't know. To me, it just bothered me to see the headline of WWE superstar Killer Khan passes away. I was like, that just seems like, again, why does everything have to be through the lens of WWE when a guy had so much more of a rich history in wrestling than just simply WWE?
Well, I mean, his career goes all the way back to the JWA. I mean, we're talking about a guy who predates New Japan when his career started, Masashi Ozawa, before he took on the Killer Khan gimmick, which I believe was Karl Gotch's idea.
Yes, it was.
He was, and he actually had two pretty significant runs with the WWF that we'll talk about, but it's interesting because it really, the Vince McMahon version of WWF history, they kind of erased the first one, which is interesting. And I guess I'll save that for later when we get to it also, because really Vince McMahon's version of history starts with 1984. We all know that, the way he tells the history of the company. It starts with 1984, and every now and then they'll reference Bruno. That's basically Vince's version of the history of the company.
You might get a Snuka. You might get Snook off the, a real quick Snuka thing. You might get back in the ring
anyway.
Waving. Not anymore. These days, not anymore. But yeah, you might. Sometimes we get the Snuka thing. You get Backlund maybe, zipping his jacket, unzipping his jacket. You get a quick Bruno thing, and then basically Hogan drops the leg, and now history has begun.
Well, just to tell you what I'm talking about. I mean, when Killer Khan came back to the WWF in 1987 for his second run after, 5 years away, 4 or 5 years away, whatever it was, which isn't a significant amount of time. I mean, you're talking, that would be like somebody who left WWE. It'd be like Cody coming back to WWE and pretending he had never been there and they didn't know who he was. He came back, and in his first match on TV, Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura are going on and on about this. Who is this man that Mr. Fuji has discovered? And Jesse's like, look at this guy, McMahon. I can't believe this man. Look at the size of this man. I can't. I wonder what he brings to. It's like he was there 4 years ago. He's a wrestling superstar who's main evented all over the world. But the first run, in 81, 82, it was wiped from the history books. It never happened because nothing happened except for Bruno. Or maybe superstar Billy Graham, or like you're saying, maybe Bob before 1984. So, but yeah, he did have the two, but yeah, he started with the JW. He goes all the way back before he predates New Japan.
Mm-hmm,
and then of course he ended up with New Japan, and he was a underneath babyface for a number of years, wrestling under his shoot name. And then that's when Karl Gotch suggested, based on, wrestling at the time, and we always have this same conversation. A lot of younger fans probably don't understand this, but, Karl Gotch's idea was that, because he was on his way, he was going to try to make it in America because his career was going okay in Japan, but the territories were still thriving at that time. And he was going to make a pit stop in Mexico and then move on and try to make it in the territories. And Gotch's idea was to take on an over-the-top gimmick because Gotch felt that in America, there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment coming off the Vietnam War, coming off World War II. And, that's no surprise. There were heel Japanese wrestlers in every territory in the country. I mean, this wasn't like some kind of super novel idea that Gotch had. It was really just common sense. But what Ozawa came up with was a Mongolian gimmick, Killer Khan. And he worked it out in Mexico first, which is something that many Japanese wrestlers have done. They've gone to Mexico and worked out new gimmicks. I mean, Tetsuya Naito is a perfect example. I mean, the whole Los Ingobernables thing. He got hooked up with those guys, and everyone knows that story by now. And,
Shinsuke Nakamura went there.
Another great example.
Left as the straight lace, pseudo MMA fighter, Inokiism guy, and came back as what Shinsuke Nakamura is today. What he's been now for the last 15 years. That completely transformed his character in the same way. So yeah, two of the biggest stars in New Japan and two of the biggest Japanese stars of the last 20 years. Went to Mexico, completely transformed themselves, and came back as completely different reworked wrestlers that ended up being in main events and two of the biggest stars.
Hiromu too.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kamatachi, was it Kamatachi?
Kamatachi.
Or was Kamatachi El Desperado?
No. Kamatachi was
Kamatachi
Hiromu.
was Hiromu, yeah. And that basically was essentially the version 1.0 of what would become Hiromu Takahashi, was Kamatachi as another recent example, but it was the same thing. So he decided to go with a Mongolian gimmick. Now, Mongolian gimmicks, again, that wasn't anything that was completely reinventing the wheel. You had, the Mongolian Stomper or the Mongols. There were plenty of Mongolian gimmicks in wrestling, and none of them were actually Mongolian.
No, never.
So he works out. He took Gotcha's suggestion and decided to take on an over-the-top Asian persona, and he went with the Mongolian thing. And he was El Mongol in Mexico, and then went to the United States, worked it out, fleshed out the gimmick, and became Killer Khan. And really from there, all throughout the 80s, in a career very similar, I would say it was very similar to when we talked about Kamala. He would come into a territory as a monster heel, and he would almost, in every case, immediately work with the top guys and go to the top of the card and work a program with whoever the top guy was, and not overstay his welcome. He'd stay 4, 5, 6 months, 7 months, 10 months tops. And then it was off to the next spot. He Mid-South, he'd go to Mid-South and he worked with Ted DiBiase in Mid-South. He worked with DiBiase in Georgia. He worked with Mr. Olympia in Mid-South. Always at or near the top. And it wasn't long before he made his way to the WWF in late 1980. And again, almost immediately he comes in and he's working TV squashes to get over. And at this time, he's managed by Blassie. On the second run, he'd be managed by Mr. Fuji. But on this 1980 run, he was managed by Fred Blassie. And within, 2 months of debuting, he's working Madison Square Garden with Bob Backlund.
Yeah, it's actually so it's not even too this how quickly WWF moved at that time. We always talk about that with Hulk Hogan, where people don't really realize with Hulk Hogan that like when he came back and Vince McMahon Jr. decided this guy's going to be my star, he didn't build a guy up for 2 years to get him his star. He was like, no, this guy's my star. And within like a couple of months, he was there. Killer Khan was wrestling Bob Backlund. His debut for WWF is December 17th, 1980. December 29th, he's facing Bob Backlund for the WWF title on MSG. The same month. It's wild.
Yeah, so, he comes in 1980 and they immediately put him with Backlund, which really was the early pattern. He did the same thing in Mid-South, in Georgia, immediately working at the top. And then, he was also working with Pedro Morales and, of course, Andre the Giant. And in 81, they did the angle in Boston where Killer Khan, because the finisher he would use is he would jump off the middle turnbuckle and do the knee drop to the throat, right? And what happened was they did an angle where Killer Khan broke Andre the Giant's ankle in Boston. Now, what really happened was Andre injured himself getting out of bed. He broke his ankle rolling out of bed in the morning, but they decided, all right, well, he was already in this feud with Killer Khan. So they decided to, make lemonade out of chicken shit, to create my own phrase there, and try to make some money off of it. So, I don't know if Andre, I guess he worked the match, which was more of an angle than a match, with the broken ankle, and they had Killer Khan put him out. And then, they built to Andre's return. And I know they did a big angle that I've watched a million times on TV too, where Andre came out on the crutches and Vince McMahon, those old style from those days where Vince would be in front of the ring.
Yes.
And the wrestler would come out and they'd do and Andre came out on the crutches, and Blassie came out to confront him, and then Killer Khan, and then Andre, he whacks Blassie with the crutch, if I'm remembering this right,
exactly,
like across the throat.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then I think Killer Khan comes out to attack him. But anyway, they had a series of rematches. They had Mongolian stretcher matches or whatever they were called, and the most famous of which was in the Philadelphia Spectrum. That one is all over YouTube. You can find
that one I watched earlier. Not hard to find at all. Very, very easy to find.
Yeah, and in that one, and I'm sure all the matches on the loop were very similar. He drapes Andre's leg in the ropes like he did in Boston and comes off and to kind of recreate the broken ankle. And Andre makes the big comeback, and eventually it's just basically a stretcher match. The guy has to be carried out on the stretcher. So he puts Andre on this little tiny stretcher.
Oh, the tiniest little fucking stretcher. Yeah, it's not the modern WWE stretcher thing or whatever. It's like a piece of steel with like 3 red straps below it or whatever. They're trying to roll Andre onto this thing, and it looks like it's gonna be tough to do it no matter what. And Khan's no small guy either. I mean, it looked like it barely fit him either. So it's pretty
funny
hilarious
too, because it's McMahon on commentary, right? I think it's McMahon.
Yes, yeah,
yeah. I don't think it's Dick Graham.
No. It's definitely
sometimes did Philly.
Yeah, it's definitely Vince. Yeah,
and he knows the stretcher's small because he's insecure about it. Because he I don't know if you heard this, but he's like, you see that stretcher reinforced by steel for these large bodies. It's a tiny stretcher,
right.
Reinforced by steel. It was definitely just a cheap aluminum stretcher, But yeah, so Andre then, won those stretcher matches all over the loop in the big cities. I'm sure they did one in Boston too, because the spot of the original injury. And it's funny because on Khan's second run when he came back in '87. He did world title matches with Hogan in Boston and Philly, and the Boston match outdrew the Philly match by like 4,000 or 5,000 fans. And I think the Boston Mongolian stretcher match with Andre outdrew the Philly Mongolian stretcher match by about 3,000 or 4,000 fans. So you could see the power of the original angle taking place in Boston. That kept Killer Khan's drawing power alive in that city for like the next 5 years.
Right.
Because because those fans remember, oh, he's the guy who took out Andre the Giant. I got to fucking get a load of this guy, So, so he's a top guy. He worked with all 3 of the top guys. He worked with Backlund, 19,000 in MSG. He worked with Andre all over the loop. And in between, he worked with Pedro, Pedro Morales, who was the Intercontinental Champion at the time, all over. And, he stuck until about 82. That was really a really long run for him, for him to be in a place from the end of 1980 into 1982 was a pretty significant run. And, he would, and Watts would always take him back in Mid-South, and he would always come in for a short while. He would never stay long at all. And he would always work with the top guys. And then he finally started bouncing back into New Japan in the early 80s. But this time he came back as a heel, as Killer Khan, and he worked with, the top heel group with Riki Choshu and Yatsu and all those guys and Animal Hamaguchi, which is funny because then when he went back to the States, and I'll talk about some of that stuff in '84, when he went back to Japan, that's when Choshu and those guys had jumped. So when he went back to Japan, he went back to All Japan. He didn't come back to New Japan after '84 because that whole group, Yatsu and Choshu and Hamaguchi and all those dudes, while he was gone, they had all jumped to All Japan. So when he went back to Japan, he went back to All Japan with his boys. But he comes back to America in '84, and this is where he has 2 of his most interesting runs. He goes up to Calgary, and again, immediately works with the top guys. He's in feuds with Archie the Stomper Goldie and Dynamite Kid for the top titles. And that was sort of the pattern of his entire career. No matter where he went, they immediately booked him to the top. He worked with the top guys in almost all these territories. And then, he'd be gone in 6 months. And from there, he went to Dallas. And that's where he had arguably, it's probably not more famous than the Andre stuff. But I don't know what Andre match you would pick. I guess you would pick the match where he broke his ankle, but that wasn't really a match. So you could make an argument. It was in Dallas where he had his most famous match, at least among hardcore smarks, and that was the Texas Death Match with Terry Gordy.
Right, which you did this week for your match of the week.
As my match of the week. Yeah, so that's the one I chose. Look, he comes into Dallas in, I guess, the spring of let me get my timelines right. Yeah, it would be the spring of 84 after the Calgary run. After, he worked with the top guys in Calgary. He was done there. And he came to Dallas for the first time. He had never worked Dallas before. And Dallas was still, they hadn't completely cooled off yet. This wasn't the super hot period. Okay, this isn't 82, 83, but it also isn't 88. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a pretty viable territory at this time. So he comes in early 84, and this was such a great storyline that they did. So he comes in as Terry Gordy's buddy, right? And Terry Gordy introduces him to the rest of the Freebirds. And they're like, all right, this guy seems like he's a fucking animal. We'll he could help us against the Von Erichs. You know what I mean? Like, no problem. So he's Gordy's pal, and the Freebirds accept him. So he's working with the Freebirds to battle the Von Erichs and battle all the baby faces in the promotion. And what they do is Skandar Akbar pays off Killer Khan to join Devastation Incorporated with the Missing Link and One Man Gang. And I think Wild Bill Irwin was there at the time. So he pays off Killer Khan, who takes the money, and then Killer Khan helps them jump the other two Freebirds. So now Gordy feels responsible for this, right? And there's this great promo, and I think you could find this on YouTube as well, where Bill Mercer is in a parking lot outside of the Freebirds van. And yes, it's exactly what
Yes.
what a van
Right.
that you think the Freebirds would ride around in 1984. You just know it's carpeted. You don't even want to know the debauchery that probably took place in that thing, okay, with various women in the North Texas area. But who knows what drugs were done in that thing, what sex was happening. But Mercer knocks on the door of the van because he's got to get comments from the Freebirds. Terry Gordy comes first. Hayes comes out. Yeah, what do you want, Bill Mercer? Yeah. Then Gordy comes busting out of the van. Don't you put your hands on the Freebirds van. Who do you think you are, Bill Mercer? And let me tell you something, Killer Khan. I trusted you, and then you attacked my brothers, and nobody attacks my brothers. And then this crazy motherfucker starts taking back bumps on the concrete in the parking lot. He rips his shirt off. He's doing like, the Ric Flair gimmick where he's like elbow dropping his own suit.
Oh, of course.
Taking
Yeah.
back bumps in the. But Gordy's doing this in like on the blacktop. He's like doing it in the middle of the day in the summer it's probably 110 degrees. The concrete's probably 180 degrees. He's taking back bumps without his shirt.
If anybody wants to watch this episode, it is the World Class Championship Wrestling number 136 from August 4th, 1984. I believe that is on Peacock and on the WWE Network. If you do want to find it there, just was able to locate it. So 136 if you want to find it out.
It's such a great promo because and while he's doing this, he's just talking shit about Killer Khan and how he can't wait to get his hands on this motherfucker. Because he put his hands on his brothers, because the Freebirds considered themselves brothers, And you could hear Michael Hayes. He's like, chill out, Terry, chill out. He's like, chill out, brother.
Right.
It's just so great. Bill Mercer played his part so well. So that was the setup for the feud. And now keep in mind, the Freebirds are still heels. Okay? So this is like a heel versus heel feud because Killer Khan joined the other big heel stable. He joined Akbar. And meanwhile, Khan is still at war with the baby. He's still at war with the Von Erichs and Iceman King Parsons, who was a babyface at that time. I know he turned constant. That guy turned as much as Big Show and Sammy Guevara, to give people a frame of reference. Chris Adams, all the babyfaces. So Khan is with Devastation Inc. still feuding with those dudes. The Freebirds are still feuding with the Von Erichs. But while this is all going on, they're building to these Terry Gordy, Killer Khan singles matches. And Khan, he wrestled Michael Hayes. He wrestled Buddy Roberts. And then finally they got him in there with Terry Gordy. And they peaked the feud at the Thanksgiving Star Wars on Thanksgiving 1984, where they had their Texas death match.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the match of the week this week on the site. And the deal there was the special guest referee was Kerry Von Erich, with the psychology being, look, Kerry Von Erich hates both of these guys. So he's going to call it down the middle. Like, he's not going to have any favor because he doesn't like the Freebirds. He doesn't like Devastation Inc. And the other thing, it's the Von Erichs, and everybody trusts the Von Erichs, and they trust Kerry. He just won the America's title. So the idea was the fans trust the Von Erichs implicitly. They know Kerry's going to call it down the middle because he doesn't like either one of them anyway. And this is one of the legendary world-class matches of that hot period with Terry Gordy and Killer Khan. If you want to watch it, I've got it up as the match of the week on our $5 tier. It's on YouTube, but you get the write-up if you watch it with us behind our paywall. And it's just a bloodfest. I mean, both guys are, Gordy's busted open very quickly. And, I think Khan wins the first fall with the knee drop off the turnbuckle. And then Gordy went, and it's Texas death. So it's, you have to pin the man. Then there's a 30-second respite. And then after the 30 seconds, you have to answer the 10 count, right? So Khan hits the knee drop, but Gordy answers the 10 count. Then Gordy hits Khan with a pile driver. And they built to that so well. But Khan answers the count. So they've got one fall on each other each, but neither guy could keep the other down. And the finish of this match is so good because Gordy gets Khan with the Oriental Spike. Killer Khan taught Terry Gordy the Oriental Spike. That was the story. When Gordy brought Khan in to team with him, because they worked a bunch of tag matches together away from the rest of the Freebirds, battling the Von Erichs, Killer Khan taught Terry Gordy this Oriental Spike, this mysterious move from the Orient, right? That everybody feared Killer Khan's Oriental Spike. And it came back to bite Killer Khan because he taught it to Gordy, and then Gordy used it to beat him in the Texas Death Match. So he uses the Oriental Spike on him. It's very clear that Khan's not going to be able to answer the bell. So at the count of 8, Skandar Akbar and the Missing Link hit the ring because they're like, well, he's not going to get up, so we have to figure out a way to get him out of this. So then Kerry Von Erich and Terry Gordy are fighting off Akbar and the Missing Link. The fucking crowd's going insane because this is the Von Erichs and the Freebirds fighting together, right? This is like, oh shit, they've been waiting for this for like 2 years.
Right, yeah.
So
after the hated feud, obviously the one that everybody
they're
knows
still feuding.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're at least for this brief moment coming together for at least a shared enemy in Killer Khan is pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, and Khan's been, and Khan was wreaking havoc in the whole territory. He put Chick Donovan out of action. I remember that angle where he destroyed Chick Donovan and Kevin Von Erich was seeking revenge for Chick Donovan at one point. This was just all very well done, and it was all over the course of maybe 5 or 6 months, and then so anyway they run off the heels, and then Kerry grabs the mic, and in his typical Kerry dumb jock fashion, he's like, well, I was the referee here.
His marble mouth.
I
was the referee over there.
It is my opinion as the referee that I had reached the count of 7, and I don't think Killer Khan was going to get to his feet, so I declare Terry Gordy the winner. Right? The crowd goes fucking nuts.
Which is not fair at all. That's bullshit.
I disagree. I think it's very fair because he wasn't going to get up. So Kerry was like, fuck this shit. I'm not going to let Skandar Akbar pull this nonsense. I'm declaring, I'm the referee. I'm declaring a winner here. So crowd goes nuts, offers his hand to Terry Gordy. Right. And Terry's so great here. He's covered in blood, and you see him shaking his head no, and that big mop, that head of hair is going side to side with the blood and the sweat flying off, and you can see him saying, "I'm not." They don't make
him like Terry Gordy, man. There's no one else. You'll never be another Terry Gordy. That look,
yeah.
Nah, no one else can do that. No one else got that look.
I'm not doing it, Kerry. I'm not doing it, Kerry. He's like, I'm not doing it. So Kerry gives him the double hand wave. He's like, all right, fuck you. Like he double hand waves him, and he leaves. He's like, all right, I gave him a chance. And then Gordy grabs the mic and like, you wait a minute there, Kerry Von Erich. You get your ass back in here, And everyone thinks he's calling him in the fight. The Von Erichs, they're never going to turn down a fight in Dallas. So Kerry turns around. He's all right. He gets back in there. He's ready. Got them fists balled up. And then Terry puts out the hand. right? And then they shake it out. Crowd fucking explodes. Reunion Arena, 16,000 people, right? Terry Gordy and Kerry Von Erich shaking hands in the middle of the ring, both covered in blood after they ran off Killer Khan and Devastation Inc. Pro wrestling, Rich.
That is pro wrestling, man. That's it. I'm surprised. You said there were 16,000 people there. They were all stuffed into a guard armory, or you're saying because I was under the impression that Vince McMahon for WrestleMania was the first time that took wrestling from smoky guard armories into big arenas with bright lights and stuff. But you're telling me 16,000 people were at the Reunion Arena for this show in 1984?
15,325 in Reunion Arena in Dallas, and this is when they were starting to cool off.
Yeah, right. This is their down period. Yeah.
Now they were still
the beginning of the down period, we should say, just because it wasn't it wasn't Texas Stadium. Period. They weren't filling Texas Stadium like they were a couple years ago.
Yeah, they were still running it. I think they had run they ran Star Wars there the next month on Christmas, and there were still, and they ran the Cotton Bowl in October that year. And that, let me see if I could find that. They ran, I don't even remember. Okay, so they ran the Cotton Bowl on October 27th, about a month earlier, and they drew 12,000, which that's a basketball arena crowd. That's not a football stadium crowd. But what was on top? 6-man tag team titles, the Von Erichs versus Jake Roberts, Chris Adams, and Gino Hernandez.
I do appreciate, though, that somebody on Cage Match put capacity 12,000 for the Cotton Bowl in Dallas.
Yeah. No, I don't think CA means capacity. I think that's German for attendance or something.
Oh,
like
okay.
That. I don't think. Yeah. I don't don't think that's what the CA means.
Because the next year it says CA 26,000, so they were able to get.
Yeah. It's funny if it would have been, but yeah, so that was that Star Wars show. It drew over 15,000. And, I know Chris Adams and Kevin Von Erich was on that show because I think Chris Adams turned heel at some point.
Yeah, that's exactly
all that. And but those were the two big matches. It was Chris Adams and Kevin Von Erich, and it was Terry Gordy and Killer Khan. Texas Death Match was a match that people still talk about to this day. And I know Cage Match has it at 6.40, which will come out to like 3.25. That's a notebook match.
It's better than that.
Obviously, I just watched that again this week, but that's one of the most memorable matches of the era. That's easily a 4-star match. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Even with modern eyes, I mean, that's just it's just an awesome match. The great post-match angle, and then again, that was it for Killer Khan. I mean, they did one blow off. They did the cage match at the Sportatorium a couple of weeks later, where Gordy beats him again. And I know that I think Chick Donovan even gave him his comeuppance in a couple of different matches in tags or whatnot for putting him out earlier in the year. And then Killer Khan was on the move again. It's again, he rarely, other than that first WWF run from 80 to 82, this is what he would do. He'd come in, he would headline, and then, because what do you do at that point? Once that Gordy feud, he came in, and that was the program from start to finish.
Right, which we need to bring back to wrestling. And I know it probably will never come back, but this is when I think it really is the best. Because like you said, you do the feud, and you have the blow-off match, and instead of like, all right, now we need to figure out something else for this guy or a new thing to do, or we'll just run it back again, the guy leaves, and the guy goes to another territory and can do the somewhat of the same thing, but a little bit different with new people. Like, this should happen more in wrestling. Like, I think all of wrestling should embrace the idea of people leaving, and they can come back. It doesn't mean they're gone forever. We're going to talk about it with Killer Khan here in a minute, of him coming back and coming and going from WWF and coming and going to All Japan and coming and going to different territories. But I love that idea of a guy. You 9 months, 10 months, you're done. You finish up your story and you leave, and you go else somewhere else, and you tell a new story somewhere else. And if you want, you can come back. But I love that idea in wrestling, and I think that's something that's a lost art in today's wrestling, where people are just there forever and ever and ever and ever. And it's a strain on them. It's a strain on the bookers as well, and the writers, to try to figure out what the hell to do with these people now that they're here. I think the indies would really, the indies in particular, would really do well by kind of re-embracing this a little bit more.
The problem is with the indies, people live places, right? And they got to work where they live,
right? And they're not going to be able to make money. No one Beyond isn't going to be able to grab a guy from Chicago and say, "Hey, come do 9 months with us here in Boston, and you'll be fine. You'll be able to make a living wage out here," because you're not going to be able to.
Right. It's not a chance,
right?
Yeah. So it's a totally different thing, but there's no reason it can't happen in the bigger promotions. And yeah, I think, you know what, we're going to talk about someone a little later where I think you're kind of seeing an example of what we're talking about here. But then he goes back to Japan, and we kind of talked about that already. All of his boys had jumped to All Japan. So when he goes back to Japan, he jumps to All Japan with him. So he spent some time there. And then his next stop in America was the second run with the WWF that we kind of talked about earlier, where they pretended that he had never been there before, and that the storyline was the crafty Mr. Fuji had found this unhinged maniac in the Orient who was in here to, and it's so funny because they behaved as if this man never existed before, even though it was the same name, the same gimmick, the same guy. He was a worldwide wrestling star and all that. And they even brought him in the same way that Vince Sr. brought him in 1980. He beat a bunch of jobbers in, a minute on TV, and the same way they did back in 1980. And then he was immediately put into a program with the world champion.
Right.
So then they immediately, now what they did was he had a brief, after he beat some jobbers, he had a brief feud with Outback Jack.
Right. I watched a few of those matches too. Those are readily available on YouTube and elsewhere.
Yeah. If you saw two, you saw both. So the first time he wrestled Outback Jack on TV, Outback Jack was still kind of, sort of being pushed. Okay. Because it was still early enough in his run before they gave up on him, because they gave up on Outback Jack almost instantly. Okay. The thing with Outback Jack is this, if I could take a quick diversion.
Of course.
They discovered Outback Jack in Australia. And at the time, the Crocodile Dundee movie was a cultural phenomenon in the United States. If you weren't around for the
you can't understand the Australian obsession that was happening in
yes.
And it lasted until Steve Irwin kind of kept it alive for a little bit longer in America too. So if you're under the age of 25, you might not get it, but if
you're not going to get it.
But if you are 25 or older, you remember that this country was obsessed with Australian things for about 2 decades or so.
And it's all Paul Hogan's fault for
yes.
these Crocodile Dundee movies. So Vince sees this Australian guy, and he's fucking 6'6", 300 pounds.
Peter Stillsbury, right? Isn't it Stillsbury is his name? Pete Stillsbury, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and Vince, I could have my own Crocodile Dundee. I can make some money, right? So he brings the guy in, and what he does is he sends him to Calgary to train with Les Thornton up in Calgary, because they had the working agreement with Calgary. And around that time, from about 85 to 87, Vince would take his projects, send them up to Calgary with Les Thornton, let them work the Calgary territory, and work out their gimmicks. So he sends this Peter Stillsbury up there to work on this Paul Hogan Crocodile Dundee gimmick as Outback Jack. Some other guys that were up there at the time, Ted Arcidi. Do you remember Ted Arcidi?
Of course.
No, he was a strongman.
Yeah.
The strongman gimmick. So he was there at that time. Bill Kazmaier, who again was another strongman gimmick, but I don't think McMahon sent Kazmaier. I think Kazmaier just happened to be in the territory, but he was there at the same. And WCW would bring in Bill Kazmaier a few years later, I think in 91.
Yeah, 91. 91 he was there, yeah.
Yeah, so he was another guy who did like strongman competitions, like Arcidi. But Arcidi was WWF's guy. McMahon sent Arcidi up there. He sent Outback Jack. Dave Barbie, who is like forgotten to history, but he was a job guy in the early and mid 80s. And McMahon saw something in him. He sent him up to Calgary around that time.
And by the way, Arcidi has the weirdest body you'll ever see in your entire life. If you don't know who Ted Arcidi is or what he looks like, look him up right now. He is the most ridiculous looking human being you'll ever see. A perfect representation of an 80s strongman. I would have pushed him too. I would have done everything exactly like Vince did. I would have done whatever I could to get that guy pushed.
And people tried so hard with these strongmen, and none of them worked out.
No.
Ted Arcidi didn't work out. Bill Kazmaier didn't work out. Steve DeSalvo didn't work out.
Patera to a lesser extent.
And Patera was a huge star in the set, but after
by the
prison,
time, yes,
Patera
right. By the time Vince tried to get him back and was like, no, he's big and strong and big, and it didn't quite.
Post prison, Patera was just which gives people kind of a negative impression of he's part of that whole group of guys who have that negative impression on a lot of fans of a certain age, whether it's Ken Patera, whether it's Hacksaw Jim Duggan, whether it's there's a whole list of them of guys who were really good workers and big stars.
Coco's the one we always bring up, where people think of Coco as like the bird guy, and we're like, no, he's so much more. God damn it, he's so much more. Duggan's the perfect one though, because growing up, I just thought Jim Duggan was the guy who sticks his tongue out of the side of his mouth and goes, "Hey, yo," you know what I mean? Does a bunch of bullshit, and then going and watching, Mid-South, you're like, holy shit, this guy's incredible. He's so good. But yeah, it's you get the impression that he's nothing more than like, oh, hey, how's it going, guys? How you doing? That's all he was. Which, to his credit, he was like, hey, I don't have to do anything and just like stick my thumb out and hold a 2x4, and I'll make a shit ton of money and not have to take any bumps. Sure, I'll do that. So credit to him. But yeah, it is it's atrocious stuff in WWF.
That whole a big debate I remember, like in grade school, was we thought Jim Duggan was supposed to be mentally handicapped or something. I
mean, it wasn't subtle. I'm kind of with you. I think
as a kid it was confusing. As a child it was confusing. Like, we used a different word that you can't use anymore, but that's what we thought. Like what he was supposed to be.
Right.
Like that's And he had this whole career as like a legitimate tough guy wrestler before that you don't discover until you're an adult,
He's also huge too. When you watch Duggan in Mid-South, you're like, God, guy's a fucking monster. He's so big, but he goes to WWF, and they're all monsters. So, I mean, he just looks like a normal-sized person in WWF.
Right.
You watch him in Mid-South against these like normal guys, and you're like, holy fuck, Jim Duggan's like Jake Roberts is that way too. Jake Roberts is a monster in Mid-South. He's so big, but then you see him in the WWF, and he's like, skinny, mid-card guy that's like, half the size of most of the main eventers or whatever. But yeah, you watch him in Mid-South and he's just massive
Well,
stuff. But
Jake never had the physique.
No.
He got roided up at first in like 86. He had some traps and some some shoulders and right. But he quickly gave up. Like, he got off the juice and he just went back to his lanky frame. He always had the height, though. Remember, the big thing was him at WrestleMania going nose to nose with The Undertaker when people really realized how tall he was. That one WrestleMania on the way out, his write off when he lost to The Undertaker at WrestleMania, whatever that was.
That was
eight.
WrestleMania 8.
And people talk about that to this day because they're like, holy shit, he's like a little taller than me. He's like an inch taller than The Undertaker.
Yeah.
And now and then they put him with Lance Archer, and it's like, why not put fucking someone small with Lance Archer? Not like Lance Archer's the tallest guy in AEW, but you put him with the other tallest guy in AEW. It doesn't
Jake
make
Roberts
any
is like
sense.
2 inches shorter than him now because he's bending over and he's old or whatever. But yeah, he's huge. Yeah.
Which never made sense. Put him with Mark Sterling or something so he looks like the monster that he is. But anyway, none of that. Those guys that got sent up, none of them worked out. Like Ted Arcidi didn't work out. He stuck around for like a year, but he was the shits. Dave Barbie came back and he was still a jobber. Like, they couldn't get anything out of him. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple guys, but Outback Jack, and he was another one. They bring him back and he gets this huge push. He's got these vignettes where he's in the fucking bush, they're
so 80s and so canceled. Like, they're you couldn't do any of these anymore because he's the most generic ass Australian guy ever. He's driving a Jeep, he's drinking Fosters, what I mean? It's like every possible stereotype.
Yeah. I don't think it's cancelable.
Well,
but
there's some other stuff too. If you see that, he talks about the Aborigines a lot.
Yes,
promos,
yes, he does.
which I don't know if you can do those anymore.
He says he learns from them and learns how to hunt and all kinds of.
I don't think you can do those anymore. But
a little collar tugging, I guess. Yeah, but
you guess.
So he gets this huge push with these vignettes and everything, and almost immediately it's obvious to everyone that he fucking stinks. Okay, and he's got the theme, Tie Me Kangaroo down, like this awful theme music, like it's just with the bazookas and the Tie Me Kangaroo down, sport. Tie Me Kangaroo.
Do you remember where they said he was from? I know you know this.
I will think of it. Yeah,
you know that they had like Bruce Pritchard work on this. Like, Bruce, find the dumbest city in Australia. That's where he's from.
Yeah. I remember it now. Yeah, good.
He's from Humpty-Doo, Australia. I don't know what region Humpty-Doo is. Maybe I don't know I don't know my territories of Australia very well, but
it's in the Northern Territory.
Oh, that's where the vignettes were. That's right. So yeah, he's from Humpty-Doo. and he stinks.
And unlike Tacula, Mexico, it's a real place.
Right. He also looked like shit. Of course. He also looked like shit too. He came out and you're like, of all the guys in this company that all look these certain ways, here's this like kind of fat dude. He's kind of old looking. He's kind of hairy. It's not great. It's pretty bad.
Well, he was big.
Yeah, but he was like I don't know. He was.
That's all he had. He was big.
He was thick. I think he was thick. He wasn't. I don't know if he was big, but he stunk.
He was. Yeah, he was. He is terrible. He didn't. Well, but they realized it very quick. And they brought in Killer Khan, and that was his first feud. Circling back to the matches you said you watched, the first one, Khan just attacks him before the bell, spits the mist in his face, and just fucking kills him. And and it's not even a match.
Yes,
right?
For those wondering, he spit mist at people because
Yeah, that was part of his gimmick.
The Orient. The Orient. So he also did the current Great O'Khan, the yelling and like kind of the banshee screaming while he's wrestling.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's clearly where the Great O'Khan is drawing the inspiration, because that high pitched squeal that the Great O'Khan does is what Killer Khan was known for, and the Great O'Khan is very clearly borrowing heavily.
Oh yeah,
from Killer Khan. And we haven't really had, like I said, the Mongolian gimmicks were pretty commonplace in wrestling for a long time, but we haven't really had them in between Killer Khan and the Great O'Khan. There really weren't many, if any. And the Great O'Khan brought it back. Now I understand Great O'Khan, I think, is supposed to be like some kind of based on some real Chinese myth or something. But let's face it, it's a Mongolian. It's a Mongolian gimmick. That's exactly what it is. It's based on these other Mongolian gimmicks. He does that same high-pitched, like, it's kind of scary, that squeal that Killer Khan would do when he was chopping people. Yeah, Great O'Khan, I'm glad I would have forgot to bring him up, but he's clearly the next step in the evolution of these Mongolian gimmicks. And the other thing, Killer Khan really, the old NES Pro Wrestling game, King Korn Karn, I believe the character's name was. That's Killer Khan. I mean,
right. Yeah.
It was Killer Khan. It looked like Killer Khan. He did his moves. He spit the mist. Like, it was fucking Killer Khan. Like, Fighter Hayabusa was Antonio Inoki. There's no question about it. Fucking looked just like him. He did the back brain kick. He did the fucking enziguri. And King Korn Karn was fucking Killer Khan. Like, there's no debate. There's no disputing it, Like, some of the others in that game, like King Slender. Who was the one who did the double-handed claw, like with King Slender, right? Like,
man, see, you probably played more of the NES Pro Wrestling than I did. I didn't play much
I think it's King Slender.
of it.
You could argue Hulk that was drawn from inspiration of Hogan or Kerry Von Erich.
Right. You got Fighter Hayabusa, who again, like you said, 100% is absolutely that's Inoki. King Korn Karn, who does the Mongolian chop and the karate kick. They say he's from Korea, but he's wearing a Mongolian hat. He's clearly Killer Khan.
And he spits the mist in the game too, I think. So it's like he's fucking Killer Khan.
Right. Then there's the Amazon, who's just he's like
a monster.
Yeah, he's like Swamp Thing or whatever. Starman, who's obviously just its own thing. And then there's Giant Panther and
Starman. So Starman was basically any masked high flying wrestler because he did the coolest moves in the game.
Right.
So
hailed from Mexico ? That's my favorite part of the entire game. Is Mexico ? And then I think it was you said it was King Slender, who is kind of just like an amalgamation of like American wrestlers. I don't think he's really one guy.
Yeah, you could say Hogan, Kerry, Ric Flair, maybe with the hair.
Yeah. And then Giant Panther, who's again I don't really know
similar.
Just kind of an amalgamation of like 5 different major American wrestlers all stuffed into one.
And then the final boss of the game was a Tiger Mask ripoff. So he looked just like Tiger Mask, but
Great Puma, right? Wasn't it Great Puma?
Great Puma. Yeah, that's it. Great Puma.
I guess I played more pro wrestling than I thought. I just don't remember who the Panther and what's his face Slender was supposed to be, but essentially like
basically American stars at the time,
right?
All and they're basically Peter Brand from Moneyball. They're a combination of people, but the final boss he looked like just like Tiger Mask, but he didn't do Tiger Mask moves. His gimmick was he did everybody's moves in the game. Like he had everybody else's move. Let me tell you something about Nez Pro Wrestling. That's like kind of playable today, 30 years
It's
later.
not bad. It holds up pretty good.
It's shockingly playable. Like, especially compared to the other wrestling games at the time, like tag team wrestling.
The rest of the wrestling games absolutely fucking suck. For like another decade, the wrestling games stink. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Yeah. Go back and play them. They're terrible up until you get into, you know, the WWF Raws and that era and whatnot. A lot of the other ones absolutely stink there. Right? Obviously, you have WrestleFest in the arcades or whatever, but most of the home games, your LJNs, your Acclaim, you know, wrestling games, absolutely terrible.
This game was made in like 1985. Everyone has their own set of moves. Everyone has their own specialty move. Like that, it doesn't sound special today. But go play Tecmo World Wrestling or Tag Team Wrestling or something. Those games are horrendous.
Yeah, Super WrestleMania. Go play Super WrestleMania where everybody has the same moves. Every single person has the same moves, and everybody looks the same. So it's like, well, why am I playing this guy versus this guy?
Or play that brutal the first WrestleMania. Play that brutal game with Bam and
yeah.
Like, you know, that game is like, I'm telling you, like if people, it's playable today. Like you'll get bored after an hour, but it's playable. But anyway, yeah, that to show you Killer Khan and what a star he was. He clearly inspired that, you know, now infamous video game character. So anyway, I'm finally going to get through this Outback Jack. So he beats Outback Jack the second time in a squash, right? So that's it for Outback Jack. Outback Jack has like one more little feud with Frenchie Martin of all people on Primetime Wrestling. And that was it. After that, it was job duty for him.
Did he go anywhere afterwards? I don't even remember him going anywhere afterwards.
His career ended. That was it. He was done.
He was done. Wow. He didn't even try. Yeah, he just was like, that's it.
Well, he got chased out of the business because everybody hated him. That's the other thing. Dynamite Kid was brutal to this man.
Wow.
I don't know if you know the story.
I don't know if I do.
We might save it for Outback's obituary. I know that sounds morbid, but like Dynamite was horrible. Like they would coax him into getting into drinking contests because it's the 80s, and they would spike his drinks and knock him out, and then they would just do unspeakable things to the man. I mean, Dynamite was awful.
What a cool
Dynamite
guy! What a cool guy that Dynamite Kid was. Yeah, what a cool dude.
But the other thing was, you know, there's a lot of Outback Jack shoots from the modern day, and he comes across like the most pleasant man. I think it was a combination of two things. He was just a normal, nice guy, which was never going to fly.
Yeah, he looked around and said, "I'm good. I'm getting out of."
Well,
this
they looked at him and thought,
they pried on him. Yeah.
Why are you normal? Like, so they didn't like him because he was just like. And the other thing is, when you hear other people talk about him, they say, yeah, well, he was a little boisterous about how he could drink people under the table. And he had this attitude because Vince told him he was going to make him a star. So I think it was a combination of who the fuck is this guy who Vince is pushing, who is terrible. And also he was a little too normal to be a wrestler. And it was just a toxic mix. They all hated him. He got ribbed to death. And, when they let him go, he just left the business. But I tell you what, when you watch his shoots, he just is well adjusted. He's a normal guy. He comes across very nice. When I watch his shoot interviews, I'm like, I'm glad he got away from wrestling. He seems like a guy who it just wasn't, especially that era. He's better off. He probably lived a better life by not being involved in this bullshit. But anyway, yeah, then Killer Khan he worked Hogan all over the loop. You know, and world title matches right out of the gate. And, you know, once he finished up with Hogan and that feud ran its course, he left like he did all the other territories. Once he was done making the top money and he started moving down the card, he was out of there. But now his career was over. That's it. He retired. That's it. That 87 WWF run is it. And why he's sort of forgotten is when you look at the luck, he comes in right after WrestleMania 3. So he misses WrestleMania 3, right? And then he leaves right before the Survivor Series. So he never worked a pay-per-view. And as we talked about, remember we talked about this with Todd Martin?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where it's like a lot of people learned their history by watching the VHS pay-per-view tapes.
Right, we talked about with Orndorff. Orndorff just missed the cut on like a few of the biggest shows of all time, and instead was on the quote-unquote biggest shows of all time that weren't on pay-per-view or whatever, that were, you know, just on, you know, not on VHSs or whatever.
Well, yeah. Well, Orndorff never got a WrestleMania match with Hogan, singles match. And if he did, he'd be remembered differently.
Kamala.
His singles match with Hogan.
Kamala would
Kamala's
do all the
another perfect
loops,
one.
and then they would say, all right, time for Mania. Thanks, Kamala. Appreciate it. Now we're going to go to Andre. And it's like, fuck, all right.
Yeah, you go, look, Kamala doesn't work pay-per-views on those early WWF runs. He doesn't work them till the 90s. You know, and it's, you know, Kamala was Hogan's feud right around WrestleMania 3, but Andre got the WrestleMania match. And then Killer Khan was the feud after WrestleMania 3, but he didn't make it to Survivor Series. So he kind of falls in the cracks and gets lost to history, because if you just are if you're 30 years old and you weren't alive and you're catching up with your WWF history through the pay-per-views, Killer Khan doesn't exist. Kamala doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So it's like they got the short end of the stick. But make no mistake, he was a main eventer against Hogan his entire run. He worked on top, you know, and he made the big money and he got the fuck out. And, you know, it's in that era where there was, in 87, there was only 2 pay-per-views. So there's no SummerSlam or anything like that. And then, you know, it was harder to kind of fall through those pay-per-view cracks as the years moved on and they started adding pay-per-view main events. But when you look at Killer Khan's career in totality, once he took on the gimmick, just about every place he went, instant main eventer. And I'm not sure that people realize what a big star he was. I'm not, because he didn't make it past 87. He didn't make it to the Monday Night War, the Attitude Era, or even into the 90s at all. So a lot of people were born after he retired or came into fandom after he was gone. But when you really go back and examine his career, main eventer everywhere.
Yeah.
In North America for the entire decade of the 80s. And just someone who I really am not sure if he's appreciated for the level of star that he was. So people may have wondered, they're going to do Killer Khan and give him the obit treatment? Yes. Look at this man's career. Look at his career. And then he owned that bar in Japan for the last 20 years or whatever, which anyone who travels to Japan will tell you that was a hot place to go. He sang karaoke and everything. And this poor fucker died in his bar in front of all of his patrons.
Yeah, so his first bar, it actually closed down during COVID, and then he reopened it in March of this year, and was, you know, again, it was, well, you know, people loved it. You always saw pictures. I always remember seeing pictures of guys there with Killer Khan, and anytime somebody would come in there, I know there'd be like every time an American guy would come in, they would go there and get videos with him and stuff, and old guys and young guys or whatever. So yeah, like you said, it sucks that's how he passed away at his bar, you know, just collapses. And I think he has some sort of heart attack or some heart related issue. And just, yeah, that's it. So that sucks, but yeah, that's,
yeah. And
this is why I want to do this segment, because I hated seeing WWE superstar Killer Khan, because it's like, that does not even remotely tell the story of what Killer Khan is. And you look at all these you know, news articles or whatever, and it's like, yeah, Killer Khan, who spent time in the World Wrestling Federation or whatever, passed away. And it's like, man, it's like an eighth of his career that you're talking about here, and nobody else is going to be going as deep as we are to Killer Khan here, and he absolutely deserves it, because he was, like you said, a big time star.
Let me tell you something, and we'll end on this. First of all, that Terry Gordy match fucking rocks. Okay. And all that world-class stuff, those tags with Gordy against the Von Erichs, those tags with the missing Link, who isn't exactly, you know, a super worker himself against the Von Erichs, they're hot matches, and they all end in these hot DQs, because they didn't beat Killer Khan for a long time in that territory. You know, they wanted to preserve those losses till they mattered. And, you know, the Andre stuff is hot. And there's a Hogan match. I think the one from Boston, okay? Because I know this because the Duke of Dorchester, Pete Doherty, is on commentary with Gorilla Monsoon, so it had to be Boston. I would recommend people watch that one. That is one of the better Hogan matches of the era. Okay, so you look at this guy, and he's a gimmick and everything, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that all of Killer Khan's matches were classics. Okay, he had, you know, plenty of them were just, but, you know, you go back and watch some of this stuff, and there's a lot of really good shit there. He had an awesome match with Hogan in Boston, you know, and he worked him in Philly. I'm not sure if I've seen that one. I don't think he worked MSG with Hogan. But the Boston match is a kick-ass match. This guy wasn't, you know, he had excellent matches too, you know, and he would drag guys into his style. And, you know, You look back at Hogan from that era, that seems to be the pattern. Terry Funk had those great brawls with Hogan. Killer Khan had the great brawl with Hogan. You really had to get him to brawl with you during that era, and you can get a really good match out of him. I think that Funk, Paul Orndorff had good matches with him, and those weren't really brawls. Those were just heated because the feud was so hot. Killer Khan had the great match with him in Boston. And some of the other guys, they'd be formulaic and they weren't very good. Just the old beat them down for 6 minutes, do the Hulk up, hit the boot and the leg drop. Those matches aren't so good. But I was very surprised when I watched the match from Boston this week. Wasn't expecting much out of it. And it was way better than I thought it was going to be. So there's good stuff out there with Killer Khan too. And we didn't talk a ton about his Japan stuff. But, if you can find some of that, it's tricky now with New Japan World. That's the thing.
It's hard. Yeah. I don't know what's up on the New Japan World. Let me check real quick. I know that searching earlier today, there's a Tenryu match. Him and Tenryu. It's not great. It's just it's pretty slow moving. It's like that era of All Japan that, prior to the Kings Road era stuff where it's hit or miss. You know what I mean? A lot of times it's very slow, and I'm sure it ends with disqualification. I don't even remember how it ended, but I'm sure it ended with double disqualification or double count or whatever. As far as what's available, on the current New Japan World, unless there's a translation issue here, there is nothing available for him right now.
Yeah, because they took everything down and they're slowly adding it back, and that's a shame because I really would have ate that up this week. And went back and watched a bunch of shit that I never saw. But, always a top guy, always in hot matches because of that. And I think that people will find if they go back and watch his stuff that it's probably better than you think it's going to be in a lot of these cases. But start with that Gordy match. It's just outstanding.
Yeah.
Especially now that the backstory of the angle and the storyline. So there's actually... I was looking now. I think there's actually a Killer Khan, Terry Gordy. Somebody uploaded a whole story of a recap of the. It is on YouTube. On YouTube. All right. Here's what you guys need to do before you watch Gordy and Killer Khan. There's a video on YouTube from the Texas Wrestling Channel, and the title is "Recap of Terry Gordy versus Killer Khan, WCCW 1984." It takes you through the whole setup to the Texas Death Match, including the van interview with Bill Mercer and the Freebirds.
Oh, there you go. So there you go. You get that whole thing on there.
There's everything.
There's one for the Hogan feud too. I don't know if you see that one too. If you look up Killer Khan and Hulk Hogan, It's like a 38-minute video or whatever that has all the promos and the matches or whatever. So definitely recommend checking that out too.
I think it has the Boston match.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Has the whole build of the Hogan feud and the Boston match. Man. When wrestling's good, it's so good.
It's the best. It's the best.
When it's good, nothing can stop it. And it's a shame. We say this every time that these guys have to die, but to really go in and rewatch a lot of this stuff. But man, I really enjoyed going back and watching a lot of this Killer Khan stuff that I hadn't seen before. And I came away thinking he's a lot better than I remembered. I knew he had the great Gordy match, of course. I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people had seen that. And obviously, I'd watched that before and some of the Hogan stuff. But, a lot of the Randy, you just type Killer Khan into YouTube and just click everything. You just take an hour out of your day. And I discovered a lot of cool shit. So, Killer Khan, how old was he? 74?
78, I believe. 76.
76 years old. There you go.
He seemed to live a pretty damn good full life. So at least there's that. But it's just sucks. But dying at his bar is just the absolute. I hated hearing that part.
Brutal part of the story. What a terrible way to go.
Yeah, I don't like any deaths, but that one in particular.
I mean, we have people we know who have told the stories of listening to them sing karaoke and everything else.
Yeah.
And didn't Jim Valley talk about going there? And,
I think he's got a picture with him and everything too. So,
singing karaoke with him and everything, and so that was a big stop for wrestling fans and everything. His bar, and for him to die in front of his customers and patrons, that's just crazy.
Yeah, it absolutely sucks. But there you go, Killer Khan. Passed away at the age of 76. We'll give you a lot of things to watch. We'll try to link them in the show notes if not, but if we do forget, though, pretty easy to find. Just search Killer Khan on YouTube. Like we said, the Terry Gordy thing, the Hulk Hogan thing, I think are good starting points. And and obviously the match of the week this week on flagship.patreon.com if you want a little more.
You know what else? Not a guy that had to have a title to be over.
Nah.
I'm
not sure. I'm going to check if he ever won a title. I was looking at Cage Match earlier. I don't know if my man.
Well, he won the Stampede. When he went to Stampede with the Stomper and Dynamite Kid, he had feuds with both of them for the Stampede title. So he definitely won that one.
So his entire run, he in 1979 was the Florida United States Tag Team Champion, but that's really nothing. Mid-South Louisiana Champion, Mid-South Mississippi Champion. That was in both in 1982. Like you said, the Stampede one in 84, and then the World Class TV title for 14 days. By the way, the combined reigns of all these, 17 days, 43 days, 26 days, 49 days, 14 days.
And we would be remiss. The Andre feud, Observer Feud of the Year, 1981. Okay? Pro Wrestling Illustrated Feud of the Year, I believe, in 80 or 81, probably 81. Are you on his Wikipedia page?
I can get back there. I just closed it out, but I can get right back
to
there.
Give people the scope of that feud. It racked up every Feud of the Year award possible in 81.
Yeah,
the Andre feud. So
that match isn't bad either. Because if you have your idea of Andre as like WrestleMania 3 Andre or whatever, WrestleMania 4 Andre, he moves around pretty good in that Killer Khan match. He's still a little nimble at that time. So it's it's 1981, definitely a little bit different. Yeah, definitely a lot different than he'd be 6-7 years ago when his body's really starting to cave in on itself and just just
81. He
still
Andre
moves.
can still move.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got it now. So it was Feud of the Year in the Observer in 81. It was Feud of the Year in PWI in 81. And I didn't know this. Match of the Year in 81 was the Andre match in May because Andre broke his ankle on May 1st, and then they had the match in Boston on May 2nd. And that one Match of the Year in Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So, you can see the impact. And that's why that's one of the first things people think of when they think of Killer Khan is breaking Andre's ankle.